But and this is what's so hard, is just that the idea of like really good parenting, all the types of parenting that, you know, you would want to promote for having kind of well-balanced children and genuine love, is all being turned on its head by the people the children listen to and seen as some way as abusive. So everything is like black is white and night is day. And then cynically, these adults or the teachers are teaching a program that just inserts an idea that will kind of meets that kind of vulnerability and offers a solution. And says, well, yes, well, actually, maybe you were just born wrong.
You have to do something at a structural level to just put some brakes and defences in place, I think, for vulnerable kids and families.
You've been interviewed a number of times, I imagine.
I have. I suppose in my situation, I'm always quite cagey about like what's gone in very personally for me, because you know, about protecting my child.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm normally when I'm much more comfortable, obviously, talking about the work that I do as part of Bayswater support, and
that's what I'm going to bring up. And that's all I'm bringing up, actually.
And just what it mean, you know, what it was like for parents when there was just the isolation before then, and everyone around. I mean, that just essentially, just how discombobulating it is to have the reality of a mother denied by everyone, and being told that if you don't go along with people who don't know your child at all, that you're somehow abusive, and then suddenly being able to create a community of other parents all going through the same thing, and how out of something really just for probably, you know, one of the worst things that can happen to your child, being able to kind of just by being able to talk about things truthfully and honestly, and just say, hang on, isn't this all really weird, and not have anyone accuse you of being abusive, of just how healing that is, just to be in that, and how hard it is to find those spaces at the moment. And just when we see parents come to us, I mean, they are in an absolutely dreadful state. I mean, it's essentially they're like a victim of what, you know, when people
let's talk about this.
That's
it's interesting, actually, because I'm on the other side of that, because I don't have a child who's you know, kind of got issues with identifying their gender. So, but I was in a school where they were indoctrinating in that way, and it just seemed absolutely.
You were a teacher?
No, I'm a mother of a child who was at the school, and so she was receiving the indoctrination, and she had some transgender friends who were, you know, a couple of boys who were identifying as girls and joining her sports lessons and possibly her changing rooms, and being encouraged through the teaching, and that came off the back of a long line of political teaching. So it's not just gender in this school; it had been critical race theory, actually, you know, subtle communications about Israel and Gaza, for example.
Most recently,
but that was actually some years ago. So see where the information is coming from.
Back.
And so
time again.
And felt that actually, because I don't have a child that's in a difficult position, some parents have got to go and put their face on this, and some parents have just got to stand up and say they're not for this kind of issue. And so I've just made a formal complaint, which got utterly sat upon by various members, even up to the DFE to some extent.
And what's the DFE?
Department for Education. So our government department. And ultimately, I've ended up in a court case trying to just be able to have a copy of the lesson that was taught to my daughter by an RSC provider. I still haven't received a copy, and I'm fighting for this for transparency, impartiality in education. And I can do that because I've been prepared to put my face on that and taken a lot of flack. And my kids are now at a different school. And so I think some parents have got to go and get messy with this and actually talk about it. And
but you either get messy with it, or it eats you alive.
You
don't really have a choice.
So
it's bad either way.
That's how it felt to me. There isn't a choice, actually.
No, it's bad either way, right?
Just so much of this is just knowing, like being, just knowing the truth, and knowing that even if everyone around you tells you that that's not the truth, you have to just hold on to that. And it's really hard. And you know what so in terms of like Bayswater Support, I mean, that's, they're kind of all the parents are at the front line of dealing with the lies and the impact that has in terms of like their child, first of all, being lied to about sex, and then being lied to about the possibility that their child can actually change sex as well.
Yeah.
And so it's obviously very important for parents just to be reassured that no, that is completely insane.
Yeah, right.
But that's a very hard. It's a very hard. It sounds obvious, but everyone around. When we started, the censorship was so unbelievable. You just couldn't find that information. And as parents, I went on to Twitter. I'd never ever seen the use of Twitter before, never been on it, but I went on it after reading Lisa Lippman's study about RAGD, because I was thinking, finally,
you'll have to tell me about
so
that.
you can then you find all these other parents, and that's, I think,
you said you had 650 parents. Do you have more?
Well, the thing, we get more parents every week, but we have no there's no signposting to us by any like the NHS, and that they all the whole thing is captured by the pro affirmation transition charities. So every time we get put up, people will campaign to have us taken down.
Oh, I see. So that's good advertising.
So people, people. But it's all it is overwhelmingly word of mouth.
Yeah. Well, that's the best way forward. Is word of mouth. At least that's it's true.
Although I think the Google algorithm is now working in our favour, because so many people have searched for us.
Oh,
it
that's
actually
good.
comes up quite kind of easily when people search for certain terms now.
So one of my friend's daughters, when she was 10, was in the Toronto District School Board, and they started a gender and sexuality association club, which she went to with her friends because everybody was going. They were all invited to go, and they would sit in a circle, she said, and then they would go around and say, what's your pronoun? What's your pronoun? And by the time they'd done this, how many times, they each had a pronoun that they chose, because they're doing this together. They're all friends and they want to belong and all of that. And she said that she thought she was transgender. She was a boy. She had a boy's name. The school helped her to find a boy's name. They said they wouldn't tell their parents because the parents wouldn't understand. Her mom kind of knew something was going on because, and I met them kind of at that time, and she was always holding herself like this, wearing great big shirts that covered her up, always keeping her eyes down. And I thought, wow, what's going on with this kid? But I had no idea. And then finally, she told her mom what was going on, and her mom called me just to get some support. And that's when I found out what was happening. But the mom was really good. She was just supportive and told her, when I was a teenager, I was so confused. I had an eating disorder, and it's taken me, my life of spiritual process to put myself back together. But all us women, we have a hard time with that time of life, but there isn't anything you can do except for get support from your family and find it in yourself, the courage in yourself to move forward bit by bit and then become a woman. And so she would talk to her about that over the months, and then but she wouldn't hear anything. She'd go back to school and say, "Oh, my parents are so transphobic."
Well, that's exactly what happens.
No, you can't. Even it was kind and loving.
Yeah, but and this is what's so hard, is just that the idea of like really good, because really good parenting, all the types of parenting that you would want to promote for having kind of well-balanced children and genuine love, is all being turned on its head by the people the children listen to and seen as some way as abusive. So everything is like black is white and night is day kind of world that we're living in.
An upside down
and
world,
it's very, very difficult. I'd say it's impossible to protect your child in that kind of climate when your child is just constantly being fed just the most horrible lies about reality.
And plus all of their friends are in the middle of it, and you want to be part of the group.
They make the children paranoid because they kind of unhook them from reality and all the stabilizing protective forces in their life.
Yeah,
and that kind of increases
they separate.
the
They won't
understand,
right? They won't understand. We'll understand, and we'll protect you. And
that's
we'll
exactly
take care of
your
you.
glitter families.
Yeah, glitter families.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like, well, families can take any form. And you don't and a lot you don't have to you can find your own family. You can choose your sex and you can choose your family.
So we've done a kind of a bad job of saying what's the ideal, of knowing that there is an ideal, because yes, there's going to be a fringe. There's always going to be people who don't fit, but none of us really fit into that ideal. But there is an ideal, and we haven't really collectively decided that that's true. And so that's been lost. So now it's just multi-headed. It's multi-headed. Who we can be and who we might be and what might.
It's relativist.
It's relativist, completely relativist. Yeah.
And I don't think we even, I mean, personally, I think we don't even need to necessarily call it an ideal in the sense that there may be ways to live that don't.
Well, there always is. Yeah.
But to use that difference, that different path, whatever it might be, to attack what is common is just incredibly destructive as far as I'm concerned. What is commonly suiting people? And
so common instead of ideal.
Well, I guess, this kind of comes down to whether if you're working with liberalism or a religious ideal or some kind of ethical, it's very difficult. And I think I understand the concept of why people want it to be an ideal, but I think sometimes we might do better by allowing the difference to be somebody else's ideal, and they kind of.
The problem is then. So, for instance, when we decided that gay marriage was a good idea,
yes.
So then we have sex education in school, but now we have gay marriage.
Well,
so we're going to have to talk about gay sex as well. How much are we going to talk about gay sex for 20% of the time or half the time? Because now, and then once you let in gay marriage, then. Well, why not pansexual? Like, why not? Yes. And so then it spreads. And so if you don't have an ideal, right, then but you can have everything else there. But if you don't have one thing being most important, then it will.
Yes. Well, what's
spread.
Interesting is we've gone from a position where, some time back, that ideal would have been carried forward by the church, particularly, and spread into culture through that way. What happened certainly in Britain is that we had what was considered a liberal education system. And so we didn't teach any ideals.
Except for marriage between a man and a woman.
Well,
we had that though, right?
But we didn't
not in the UK.
Not in the UK. No. How long ago would that have been promoted, do you think?
I don't remember it being promoted when I was at school.
No.
Not at all.
No.
Certainly decades, most of the 20th century, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that
that's right.
That creates a vacuum that's waiting for some form of moral conviction.
Yes, right.
And of course, social justice has swept into that and has now justified its right to come and be the moral backdrop that we can teach. And actually, I think you have to have one of two things. You either have to have a culture that's agreed on its ideal and can present it, and it's comfortable largely with that.
Yeah.
Or you have no ideals and you have that open liberal space for discourse, and then you have to mind that very, very carefully.
Well, we've tried.
And yes, well, that's essentially, we've been through that and it hasn't been minded. And a new moral force or moralizing force has come in to take over the values-based culture. So yes, you could argue because that liberalism failed, it's evidence that we can't do without the ideal.
Well, ever since the Enlightenment, really, this has been changing.
But it's very, but I think it is important to recognise that it was very different. But a lot of the issues in America that I can imagine that people are very much reacting against, it doesn't, it did contextually, it doesn't actually make sense in the UK for that reactionary force to be there. Like, it's very much a pseudo reactionary force. Like, we haven't had the issues that we've had with for example, race and the rights of gay people it's not the same history as America.
No.
And we all grew up with David Bowie and Annie and just all kinds of non-conformity that was very accepted.
Yeah,
in the 1970s, some of the most famous TV presenters and actors were gay. I don't think you had, so it really, that when
there'll always be gay people.
No, but it's always extraordinary to hear about our children tell us like that they are the vanguard of acceptance. And I'm like thinking, well, hang on, I didn't have a problem with this. And 30 years, 40 years ago, some of the most popular television entertainers were gay. And it wasn't like it was some massive scandal. And they're all thinking that they're reinventing.
They'll always be gay.
But it's very much about that this generation thinking that they're reinventing. They've been told that they've been almost told that when we grew up, we were almost like we were living in some kind of medieval world where gay people were stoned, and we're like, what? I mean, and that's what's just so
they just don't. They don't know the history.
Well, the history's been totally erased, and they've been given a different history to that which actually happened.
I think that's what's very useful about Britain is because it has a different history on race. We can see the cult-like effects work because where America has a kind of more complicated dialogue, we're actually having their arguments. So it can only be by propaganda because it doesn't
the internet
fit with our project.
Well, and I'm Canadian. I'm not even American. And we did.
I think we're all sort of being.
We all had different.
I think the proxy, but I mean, it is interesting. So because all I know is that there are certain universities in Canada that seem that people have come from Canada to work in key institutions in Britain in a form of entryism. And they have been vectors for the critical social justice theory. So there's, but
especially with RSE,
I don't. But all we know that the critical social justice theory that our children they wouldn't describe it as that. They just think that's the truth and that's the history. But we know that it has come from North America.
And when did that come over? Do you think?
Well, I mean, they've attempted to push it many times.
It's in the 2000s that I think.
But that was when it really took hold.
I suppose that's the moment at which the UN is also reframing some, definitions of what women are, and at that point, and then from about 2006 to 2007, there was a key project, I think, which was slightly funded by Pfizer, worked through the Wellcome Trust.
What's the Wellcome Trust?
The Wellcome Trust is a very, very wealthy fund which is concerned with science, medical innovation, and it does some philanthropy, and it's kind of promotes things in the arts to get the discourse into public. And so they funded a project by a group called Gendered Intelligence, and there was also a sort of academic wing to that. So something at Goldsmiths University was being developed there, where their academics and sociologists are describing why we can take these very arts and culture-based ideas about gender and then turn them into science and medication and surgery, and putting that together in a way that I would say does not stand up academically at all. If and I've read those papers now, and I'm aghast that actually they had a good effect. The government listened. I mean, they had a powerful effect. The government listened, turned it into policy, embedded it into the health service, into the schools, and used gendered intelligence. Still to this day, is very influential and has been defining how those policies will will go. And that was, I think, the biggest movement from of importing that ideology.
Do you think that? Do you think it's still worthwhile for kids to go to school with all of this sexual?
Well, I think having moved my children from one school to another school.
And was that from a bigger centre to a smaller centre? Or?
No, it was simply, to be honest, I didn't have even much choice where I went. It was just to get out of one school.
Yeah,
so,
right.
And that move shows or tells me that I needed them to be out of that environment, and it was, there was persuasion from teachers, there was persuasion from children. It coloured the entire characteristic of the school increasingly.
Yeah.
And it, there was evidence of bullying starting based on these ideas, or just children being very much, for example, of a girl group of, half a dozen, maybe 10 children, about 50% of them played with their gender identity. They were either non-binary, they were trans, they were kind of asexual, they were pansexual. They needed a label, and they started to change pronouns. And what my daughter always shares a lot with me and tells what's going on. So she would show her phone how many love hearts and congratulations and pouring out kind of support and basically likes for being in some way non-heterosexual, or non-cisgender, as they call it, a biological man or woman. And so the power of that, and then it's reinforced. So that one particular lesson was designed to say your gender identity is much more intrinsic than your biological sex. So not just saying that you've got a gender identity, but it's now more important. And that's breaking up the person. It's just like kind of severing your sense of self from your own body. It just seems profoundly dangerous to me.
Well, it's psychological. Way. I mean, it is psychologically abusive because it's so unsettling for children. And what we hear from so many of our parents is just how once the child is fully affirmed, as it was, that often things really, so they go from being a bit, having a bit of anxiety to going sometimes into full-blown psychosis because there's just nothing there to connect them to reality.
And that's part of postmodernism too, is like that. It really separates you from anything that is grounding. I didn't know anything about postmodernism, so I did a podcast with someone to explain it to me, and the video wouldn't work, so it was just audio. So I was really attending to the audio. And after about an hour of listening to him describe what it's all about, I felt like I wasn't on the ground, that I couldn't touch anything. And I felt kind of sick to my stomach. And I thought, oh, what a terrible way for someone to have been taught that this is reality. So I think I understand what these poor children are going through, this feeling of not belonging, of not knowing what to grasp and hold on to.
Very vulnerable children, overwhelmingly. So they're all, but the whole, what we've very much noticed is that this is very cynically targeting children who often already have been victims of some, of at the very least, a tricky childhood. So kind of children with neurodevelopmental issues. Often neurodevelopmental issues and same-sex attraction, which makes it doubly hard growing up as a child, or abuse, or some of them have just what we would a lot of people just invisible kind of identity issues. So some of them may be from a mixed race family, or they may be immigrants, and just things that just.
How old are these kids?
Well, the majority of the children are they are kind of teenagers. When they encounter this. Some of them, it just depends when so puberty is often a big time for kind of questioning everything. And I think what's just so scary is that everything about that stage of adolescence is actually about the one time in your life you do actually think about identity, even though you don't have that language to describe it. You are thinking about, well, who am I, where am I, do I belong? I used to be very happy playing with all these boys, and now my body's changing, or I've gone to this and all these people, they can fit into their social group, but I feel like a bit of an outsider because I've got a different understanding of the world because I grew up in a different country, or whatever, or just I went through a really horrible abusive experience as a child and I don't really know who to trust, and so you've got all of those issues, and then cynically these the people who, the adults or the teachers are teaching a program that just inserts an idea that will kind of meets that kind of vulnerability and offers a solution and says, actually maybe you were just born wrong. Which you just think, how could they? That's just the whole idea of just saying you're born wrong, and the solution is to totally change everything that is real is not real, and actually to kind of realise that you just take a load of drugs and undergo some surgery, I mean, for me, what I find so hard is that nobody questions just how horrible and frightening that must be as a child, to be told that is how to solve their psychic distress or problems, which and it feels just an abuse on an abuse.
So how many of the kids' families that you have been in contact with didn't know what was going on in the school because the school was teaching them and not taking it home?
So when we started in 2019, the overwhelming majority of these children it was the issue had come via the internet, and so it was online indoctrination via like YouTube, the algorithm. It was like algorithmic indoctrination, for want of a better word. And these children were at the most vulnerable end because, of course, if you're kind of vulnerable and you're finding it hard to make friends, like the internet seems like an amazing solution to that.
Do you know if it was really short, like TikTok type of thing?
Yeah. So it was, so with the girls, it was there were all
Instagram.
No, it was mainly YouTube videos of trans-identified females saying, look, I'm a man now and my life is so much better and I was completely miserable before.
Right.
And it's just all this transformational kind of marketing, the idea that they can be reborn and be kind of have a happy life. And if you're really, really miserable and you're being bullied and you don't feel like you fit in, that's going to be kind of, wow, that's my escape
route. Did you
route.
find that too? Was it social media?
Yes.
Initially, yeah.
I think there was social media from outside school, and then there was the social media of the children talking to each other.
Yeah, like the social contagion.
Oh yeah, because they have usually now platforms that are inside the school, right?
Yeah, but
we also had a rainbow club, so that was something that is now very typical, and you described before, where a teacher who himself is gay and felt, I suppose, that he was offering what they would call a safe space to these children to come and discuss these issues, and of course, actually, it's reinforcing emblems, the flag, the kind of symbols that when you perhaps go to that and feel a little special. You start to make positive associations with things. This is really basic psychology. This is things that safeguarders should understand. And at best a nice idea, and at worst they are indoctrinating on purpose. And either of those things should have no place in a school. But that was very much happening, and that kids being unpleasant, not unpleasant, but warning each other about what they mustn't say. Articles from the Guardian, be careful what you mustn't say to someone who's in this state, because they might then be suicidal or something. And so very much this was a girl group as well, and I think women have always been the policemen of society. Actually, we tend to say culturally, we tend to form groups and say what's in and what's out.
Right.
And I think there's a sort of perversion of that going on, where women are kind of coming together to say, we're going to determine what is good here, and we're going to say how people can be, and we're going to be quite mean to those who don't, who have different ideas.
Yeah. And so, we're very loyal in, but very combative out.
Yes. And I think that's kind of playing out here. It was about establishing a girl group and its hierarchy, and which was always very difficult in teenage groups, and so that was playing into it as well. And I mean, it had become a slightly oppressive environment in that way.
So you started Basewater. Why don't you tell my guests about that? I kind of initially went on to Twitter because I felt very socially isolated as a parent, because even though I had good friends, it was just such a different experience that anybody knew about, and I didn't really understand that much about the whole I think most parents were aware of the narrative put out by groups like Mermaids, which we naively thought was maybe a thing, that there was such a child, that they were so kind of extreme in terms of gender nonconformity that they, even as very, very young children, started saying things like that they were supposed to be the opposite sex, and
that they kind of had very carefully curated videos of these children, always pre-puberty, where it wasn't, it was where everything seemed to be congruous with what they were saying, that these children did seem to be quite extreme examples of children at the very, very extreme end of gender nonconformity. So, but it was something very much, you thought, well, this is a very extreme, very, very rare condition. And then all of a sudden in the the 20 teens somewhere, which I think it suddenly started to really escalate. But a lot of the majority of these children had no history of any kind of gender nonconformity or any kind of understanding that there was like any kind of issues. And yes, they may have been mildly kind of but I mean, in a country where it's very normal to, I mean, we were very familiar as growing up that with a concept of not necessarily, there was no playing with the same toys as your brother played with, or where, I mean, I remember my brother and I shared clothes because they weren't heavily kind of, I didn't really wear dresses. We all just had like dungarees and things like that in the 1970s. So it wasn't, it just didn't feel like, nothing would have like triggered anything like, well, there's something wrong with my child.
Projecting a false past. That's one of the thing I think I see commonly with across race, gender, disability, even all of the social justice causes. There's a projection of a false past so that we can create the new future. And that rupture between those two things has to happen between the parent and the child, because the parent is the memory, and it goes back and understands the country and the liberty and the sort of ideals that were there previously, and the child has got to be separated so that new project can be installed in them. And so but what was interesting was because it was so incongruous what we saw happening with our children and then what we had been told a transgender child was, you kind of thought you just couldn't reconcile like your child with you thinking, well, hang on, this doesn't make sense, and overwhelmingly our children have had like a prior history of neurodevelopmental conditions or struggles at school, all kinds of other things, and then all of a sudden this transgender identity arrives like the cherry on the cake to kind of wipe out everything. And so it just didn't really add up. And I think some parents are just saying, oh, well, and very much the answer to that was, well, you're just very out of touch. But if you just do what we say you do, then your child will be fine. And if you don't, they might kill themselves. And that didn't work with me, because I just thought that just sounds like very coercive to me. And hang on a minute, it just couldn't on any level get my head around it. So I didn't know why it was so felt wrong. I just knew it felt wrong. Okay. And I'm always someone who's just trusted my instincts, because when I've ignored them, I've come a cropper. So I've just thought, okay, and then I came across the Lisa Littman study.
And tell me about that.
Which is, she had surveyed a load of parents whose situations are very similar to everything I've described, where it was post-puberty, having had not a particularly anything noticeable that would identify your child in gender terms, maybe noticeable in terms of neurodevelopmental issues or other kind of issues, struggling to make friends at school, but nothing in terms of anything. Well, it just wasn't even
sexual.
No, not even that. It just wasn't even. I mean, I just didn't think in terms of even the word gender. And most of the other parents were the same, because we weren't all particularly gender conforming like girls when we grew up either. So it just didn't.
So what did you do?
So I just worked out that if you gave yourself like the tag ROGD, you might be able to find, it was a way of being.
What's that tag mean?
Rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is basically means
see.
Adolescent onset as opposed to the very early onset that had been described historically. And from then, being able to meet other and we all, and the similarity of stories was just extraordinary. And then so we went from a kind of like a Twitter group to forming an actual parent group, because at the time there's multiple charities, all of which make their support conditional on you affirming your child, i.e. going along with everything that your child says, accepting it all at face value, that they are effectively, that their gender identity overrides everything about their sex, and you have to treat them as they feel, this concept called gender identity.
And was that coming from the school or the medical field?
At that stage, it was coming, the schools are different. So, I mean, it was primarily coming from the medical field. Mm-hmm. So a lot of parents, their children would come across this, and then some of their mental health system, mental health would actually get worse, because that's very much fed into, you've got to do this, and if you don't do this immediately, you're going to go through puberty. Yeah, and there's no way
high
back.
Stress.
And people who do that often they kill themselves. So yeah, it's like high pressure selling.
Yeah, and that came from the medical field. That narrative came from the medical field.
I think it came from online, but then they would go to the doctors. The doctors wouldn't do anything to disabuse them or do any reality testing with them. And a lot of so we have something called CAMS, which is a Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. Mm-hmm. And so children would get referred to CAMS, and rather than seeing that as a child holistically and thinking, let's look under the bonnet a bit more, because this sounds like quite a out there kind of idea, they just were just like, and just funneled them all to the Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, the Tavistock. And they didn't look at any of the underlying conditions at all. And they'd go there and everything else would get ignored. And
so is that when you started the
no, that had been happening for quite some years. And so we started Bayswater just because enough of us got together to say, okay, we can now form a group.
And how did that group change things for you and for the other parents?
I think it just providing a space whereby parents could just tell the truth about how they felt without being made to feel that they were abusive.
Was this in person or was this online?
Yeah, so all online. So it's all kind of, we have like,
lots of people,
forums and things like that.
Yeah.
And we do meet up in person. And
so you have small meeting up, because you said 650 people UK
so we have
Ireland.
Yeah, so we have like a forum. So we have kind of a forum online, but we also arrange. We don't all meet up. We have like Zoom meetups, so we do regular Zoom meetups, that type of thing. But ultimately, we also what I've noticed is because so many of the children are exceptionally high intelligence. I mean, it seems to select for, which is just what you just think is
creative often too.
But I don't think people truly are aware of just how it is selecting for often the brightest child in the school. So the amount of children who are like on scholarships or who are like the brightest child, they're kind of headed for the Oxbridge types. And you think all of these children they're trying to sterilize. It's really, but those children, they have quite bright parents because IQ is hereditary. So we have been able to pull on an amazing community of incredibly bright parents in different kind of fields. And so to get resources, so some of our parents are kind of like adolescent psychiatrists, for example, and, or kind of in every single field. So we've been able to be able to write kind of materials and understand about the neurodevelopmental conditions that underlie that, and just create a website that offers people kind of actual useful resources. Whereas when you go onto the other websites, it's all about, well, come to our meeting. Yeah. And if you want us to give you any resources, well, we can come and train you, but it will cost you.
Yeah.
Whereas we're giving it all out for free about autism,
that's
about the
really
stuff.
Good.
And so I think that parents, because I think a lot of parents, even if they are kind of quite naive about it, and I wouldn't expect most parents to do the kind of a deep dive some of us have done into critical social justice theory, but I think a lot of them they apply the affirmation model and they see that it hasn't necessarily made their child any happier. Sometimes it's made them a lot worse.
Yeah.
But on top of that, they're still finding, no matter how much they do, it's never enough, and the child is still demanding more and becoming more estranged. And if you start with affirmation, very quickly the child sees the incongruence between what the identity they're trying to present in their body is even more apparent once everyone around you is using opposite sex pronouns. And so then they start to demand the hormones. And there's a lot of parents where they've been convinced by this idea that it's not really that big a deal to kind of do a social transition. They don't realize the psychological impact of that, but they are kind of very much more
that medicine is now waiting. So there's a romantic harking back to, oh well, teenagers gender bend, we did in our day, and look at the pop stars. There's a romantic idea that this is the moment you play,
right?
But they don't realize it's
medicine waiting to cement this play into an incredibly
but not only
outcome.
I think too the birth control pill, when we started taking that in the early 60s, and we've never talked about the effects of those hormones on women.
Well, I think we have to look at this as a whole, don't we? Because it's the same industry that sells synthetic hormones, and so it probably matters a great deal that we don't have a really good understanding of what we did at that point with regard to bypassing our own.
But also, so much of this is false. So, for example, even the whole idea of gender nonconformity, if you look at the people who were gender nonconforming, they were truly quite revolutionary at the time. They were doing it in an organic way, as like a form of rebellion. Whereas when we see the kind of the gender nonconformity that our children are taking on via social transition, that isn't even gender nonconformity. They are actually being very conformist. They were maybe mildly gender non-conforming when they were identifying as their sex. But as soon as they take on the gender identity, that is, they do the most stereotypical things to try and live out that gender, which has got nothing to... Everything about it is conformity at the most extreme. So like a non-conforming girl will suddenly kind of try and make herself into the most... she will try and conform to male stereotypes more than the average teenage boy, and vice versa.
Well, of course,
for some of the boys. Extreme. And so,
have you heard of John Money? Do you know who he is?
Yes, no, absolutely. You know all about John Money, and that's the Marima twins. But a lot of the other thing that makes it quite tricky for people to understand is that you've got these two very separate populations, both of which I feel are kind of abusive. So you've got the original population of the non-conforming, pre-gay children who nobody really talked about, because both the child and the parent felt like that they were somehow getting what they wanted, and it was a very hidden population. And
getting what they wanted?
So you've got a parent who's very uncomfortable with their child's non-conformity, and the child is socially very uncomfortable with their non-conformity. And so it appears to be like a solution, and because it was a tiny amount of children. And I also do wonder about the kind of the class thing, because I know children who fell into that category whose parents were not in any way that worried about their child's nonconformity, who said, I kept them well away from doctors, and they are all gay adults. So I do wonder how much, that was the initial thing. It feels that was actually a lot more socially driven, that children from a very early age can...
So these were naturally gay kids who have been changed. Yes,
absolutely. Yes, so that was the original population, but people, I think a lot of people who weren't that close to gay children growing up, maybe they just weren't aware that actually this is just conversion therapy in its most extreme. It's taking a child and interfering in their natural development of their sexuality. And so you've got that population, and then you've got the ROGD population as well. So both, I'm not saying like both are wrong, but they've come up from very different roots. So the ROGD, they're kind of almost, it's just a complete pseudo kind of issue that is being created externally. Like these children, like I say, a lot of them are not, the gender non-conformity, they may be not, they are non-conforming children, maybe because of the neurodevelopment, and there are some of the girls who are autistic and will be lesbians, maybe they're a bit, but normally they would have just grown up as tomboys, and it's that was very acceptable. It wasn't ever unacceptable for girls to be non-conforming, and those are the overwhelming majority. So there's something very weird about this, about how, because this is not a societal thing from Britain, this is like an imported idea that somehow these children are...
Yeah, well, it's been imported everywhere. It's imported
this
into
idea
the States as well.
And it's about understanding why such a pernicious idea can really take hold and parents be absolutely powerless to do that. And then you have to look about, well, what is empowering all the people to have access to the children, and to completely defenestrate everything that parents normally can do to protect their children.
I think your idea about the online platforms, because when people are on online platforms, there's no one there saying, there's no one there telling them they're wrong, because they can't be slapped. If they say something completely outrageous.
Well, you can just block anyone, but also you can just block them. You can block them.
But then they have another platform that they can go on and talk to. So there is and the social media companies don't stop those people from saying the things that they do. So they're emboldened to say more and more outrageous things. And but that doesn't happen in your day-to-day life.
Yes, well, what concerns me is the degree to which that has become institutionalized into our government and our education systems, our companies, and I think that I don't know if those adults are also being swayed by social media, or whether actually, I'm sure they are, but I think there are also very concerted drives from from international NGOs who have particular lobby kind of objectives, lobbying objectives, who have managed to sway government to become the backer of this. Then you have to also factor in just arbitrary personal interests. Members of government who perhaps have a child who's saying that they're transgender, or members of government who are very concerned about LGBT rights because of their own life. And so I think that is having an effect, and people find it very, very difficult to talk about that, because it seems to be targeting somebody as being right or wrong based on their identity or their family situation. But we do have to be able to discuss what is shaping our politics, and sometimes that might even be personal. So there's some of that going on, which is difficult to address. But without a doubt, I'm now seeing it as an institutional problem, not just something that's running free in the internet. It has actually captured the institutions.
That's true.
And that's pretty much why I took my court case, which was to try and expose just as one single lesson plan in a school to show that parents must always have the right to see. Because we've got to start with the building blocks. Some of these kind of the emotional conditions of the kids are so complex that you can't start there, because we've got to unpick their personal difficulties and their family.
And it's complicated.
And we have to do something at a structural level to just put some brakes and defenses in place, I think, for vulnerable kids and families. And those things that I feel I can contribute to, just as an ordinary citizen, standing up and saying, look, can we have some proper process back? Please, can we make sure that every parent can see exactly what their child is taught? And I thought that would be quite an easy thing to score. Surely everyone agrees I get to see everything my kid's taught, unless I'm proven an abuser and need to be out of the picture in some way,
And what happened when you had that?
Remarkably, the school said, no, you can't see these teaching materials, because they were delivered by a third-party provider. So they have that they're external to the school, and they can use their copyright defense to say that they would like their materials to be kept secret so that their competitors don't see it.
I see.
I think what they really want is for the parents not to see it.
Sounds like it.
But they say that it is a competitive issue. That means that I made what is called a Freedom of Information request, and that was turned down. And so then I get to go to the Information Commissioner's office, which is sort of he's the arbiter of these things. Asked him, can I please see this lesson? And he backed the school. No, it will stay secret. And said the commercial interests of the third-party provider outweigh your public interests as a parent to know, which is astounding. There's no
precedent for that.
There isn't a precedent for that. Ethically, it's just unthinkable, actually, to say that, to come to that conclusion. And, even if he felt the law had to persuade him to do this, you would think that you would be saying something along the lines of, maybe we need to look at this in legislation because this is such a bad outcome. But he seemed very pleased with it. Incidentally, the Information Commissioner has recently joined Britain from New Zealand, where he worked as the Privacy Commissioner for Jacinda Ardern, and has a a trans-identifying child of his own.
Right.
I can't say that swayed his decision at all. But, but
no, you wouldn't say that.
I wouldn't say that, but it does matter, I think, that as we discuss these incredibly powerful decisions, that we ask these questions about what people's motivations are and why. And so then I therefore went to court. So to question the ICO's decision, I can go to first tier tribunal, which is the start of a sort of court system, and tested it there, and the judge sided with the ICO. Again, the commercial secrecy will outweigh the parents' right to know, and that's where I'm stuck at the moment. So I still haven't seen the lesson plan, and I will go and appeal again to a higher tribunal. But
what do you think of that? That it's kept in such secrecy?
Well, it gives me an intense internal fear that my democracy is now no longer there.
Right.
This is a failure of something profound at constitutional levels, ethical levels, spiritual levels, everything. It's a massive failure.
And parents, I mean, just the whole idea of keeping everything, like so the way I mean, I don't know about how it works in North America, but parents have responsibility for a child till they're 18.
Yeah, same way.
And so by definition, you can't really have rights without responsibility, yet somehow children's rights can override their parental responsibility to look out for their best interest. And because of that tension, and we're very fortunate in this country in that we do have very robust what's called safeguarding frameworks, and these safeguarding frameworks have been developed based on what's called serious case reviews of awful historical child abuse, and to identify like what predatory behaviour and to protect children from predatory behaviour. Yet this kind of whole kind of child rights-based framework seems to have fatally undermined all these safeguarding frameworks. So now people who are actual child predators, and the way I would define that is people who I'm not just talking about kind of obvious like paedophiles, but people who would seek to exploit or manipulate a child for some agenda that isn't in their best interest, are being allowed not only access to children, but access to children without parents ever knowing. And actually psychologically harming children by introducing thoughts and concepts that are not appropriate for children to kind of really have to think about at that age.
So parents have to question their
But a lot
schooling.
of the problem is by the time parents often their first awareness that this has happened is when the child comes home saying something that couldn't possibly have come organically from a child thinking about it, but has been introduced to them at school. Or the other thing that happens quite a lot is a child may be a bit anxious or struggling or maybe a bit bullied. And the school, I mean, I've heard of schools sending children who are self-harming to the pride clubs because everyone's very accepting there.
Oh, yeah.
And then a whole load of kind of indoctrination happens there. Or going to the school counsellor and counsellors actually saying, well, if you're struggling with puberty, have you ever, and then introducing gender identity to the child there. And the child then forms an attachment relationship with the counsellor that undermines the attachment to the parent, and it means that the parent is then unable to protect them from actually being psychologically abused effectively with the introduction of these ideas, and that is the norm now in this country.
And that's why it's just so incredibly important that we have to have access to the information. We have to be able to see it all, and I'm sort of researching constantly now and finding more and more reasons why the people developing these theories and presenting them might not want us to be able to see this. And in a way, we're seeing the usurping of good safeguarding and common sense with a rights-based agenda, which these terms get used a little bit easily, and I know people worry about conspiracy theory and so on, but the very simple fact is that we have UNICEF has created a program in the UK called the Rights Respecting School Award. Thousands of schools have signed up to that, and they are presenting what is actually a new constitution really to our children without us fully understanding what that means. The British Constitution is very different to the American, and it has it doesn't enshrine rights in a bill.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that there's something very important about that. It bases its sort of political philosophy on the assumption of liberty first. And then the state may come in when your liberty is being harmed by someone else, or you're going to do harm to someone else.
Yeah, the common law in England is the best law in the world.
I think it is. And I think what we're seeing is a kind of, a use of these identities to advance rights as the system of governance that we must have. Because, you to use a right, you really have to have an identity. Because otherwise, what does your right mean? Your right means something when you're a mother or a woman or gay.
Your right means that it's someone else's responsibility.
Yes, to deal with. And
it's a special interest.
For, rights are determined by, some kind of arbiter and authority. And they're really only as good as the guarantor who promises to keep them. What interests me about democracy and British sense of liberty is we're our own guarantor. It is fundamentally a different concept. We are supposed to be voting consistently for our own liberty and then designing laws to prevent us harming each other according to our very complex interests, which can't be defined by just an abstract right. And, we have to mediate over and over again because, it might go one way or the other. And what we're seeing at the moment is this is appropriation of children for children's rights as a sort of proliferation of so that I think it's the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child was developed in about 1989, and that movement has been placing the child's rights at odds with the parents' rights and creating this schism in the family, so that people can then work with those child rights to achieve their interests, and they're broad. I mean, they can be political, they can even be predatory, and or they can just be, satisfying a deep need to patronise other people and take control.
And in some places, they are actually teaching about these child rights from 9 months old in a nursery. They're singing rhymes about your rights. And so, children are often, you have rights, you don't have to do what your parents tell you because and so you can imagine the degree of conflict that creates in trying to bring up children full stop.
Right. So that's putting kids in daycare, and that's what they're getting from daycares.
No, it's in all the schools as well. I mean,
9 months old is all.
So that is, I mean, that's an extreme case, but that is all in schools.
Very much. There is a push for more childcare earlier. The early years childcare, as they call it here, and nursery. So the government is looking to fund more of those earlier places, so women can get back to work, contribute to the economy, and to me that looks like cheap is dearer in the end. Fundamentally, we're taking away the one-to-one parenting that's so valuable for making a stable personality in the child, and
those especially that first year, but even more than that, to be with your parents and your siblings as much as possible
is of great value and happiness, and so yes, I think that we can look at that as in the round actually, as a kind of separation of child from parent, a disintegration of the family, and partly to install politics, partly to kind of satisfy yourself. I think.
Do you have any final words that you'd like to say?
Well, I mean, I certainly would mention the fact that there are some MPs in Britain who are pushing for a bill which will secure parental they might say parental right, but I prefer to say it's a transparency bill that's looking to our schools to make all their kind of curricula available to parents when they ask. And I just thoroughly support that. I think we just got to start with empowering ourselves so that we can then kind of reclaim our liberty and our democratic position and
our authority for our children.
Yes.
And I would agree. I think the way forward is to really robustly uphold the right, if any right, it's just the right to tell the truth. And the right to go against the consensus and be protected from that consensus, like to be free thinkers. And I'm very, so any bills which talk about criminalising hate speech, conversion therapy, or are very high risk pieces of policy to have in terms of protecting free speech, because of course, you know, depending on who's writing the bill, they get to decide what's hateful or not.
Yes, right.
And anything that's based on feelings is very prone to kind of manipulation and gaming by certain interest groups to suppress inconvenient views.
Yeah.
And at the moment, that's parents. We have some very, you know, we are now, you know, parents themselves are seen as like problematic to some of these grand projects.
Yes. Well, I was described as an anti-LGBT harasser for making my inquiries.
Right.
You know, so and thankfully, you know, the school in the end kind of established that there was zero evidence of this.
Yeah, if you're quiet, if you don't respond, it goes away. They go away.
Yeah,
but you have to be patient.
We have
a couple of weeks.
We have parents in our group who have been arrested. We have even parents who've been put in police cells and so I can only imagine that will get a lot worse if we actually have laws. Because at the moment they're just being harassed, but if we have laws, then they won't be able to.
Well, we need our community. I'm glad that you're thinking of community, because in order to be brave enough to stand up, we need other people to stand with us.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
So don't stand alone, and don't hide what you have to say either. You know, tell someone what's going on.
Communities, I mean, I would say that so many of our parents, it's literally rebuilding their confidence in themselves as a parent and a mother just by being allowed to speak to other people.
Yes.
And being able to speak freely, I think, is the only way that you can do that. If you have to watch what you're saying all the time, that is like second guess your own instincts. That's really going to interfere with making good decisions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both.
Well, thank you.
It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.